and welcome to Serenity in Leadership's series on leading responsibly with integrity and purpose. A series dedicated to conversations with people who are shining examples of this kind of leadership. My name is Thom Dennis, and I'm the CEO of Serenity in Leadership. And today I am with Ray Martin. Ray's been a friend. We were just trying to work it out for probably 27, maybe even, I don't know, longer years. And he's an adventurer and has written an amazing book called Life Without a Tie, which I have. Whoops, that's back to front. But anyway, and it's the story of his adventure, which he went on. And in the context of what we're talking about, of leading responsibly with integrity and purpose, I'm really curious to put your experiences, Ray, in sort of plugging them into that exploration. So I should have said a long time ago, welcome.
Thanks, Thom. Great to be back and see you again.
Yes, it's lovely to be with you. So, Ray, for those that haven't read the book, and of course everybody's going to want to read the book afterwards, and also congratulations on reaching the 500 plus mark for the sales of your book, which is a real achievement. So that's fantastic. Just briefly, tell us the journey that you had. I mean, we can go into the detail, but just sketch it out, if you would.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I mean, ironically, even though I wrote the book, it was never my intention to, when I left England in 2005, I truly believed I was just going for a 6-month sabbatical because I'd been in a very sudden and unexpected divorce with my business partner who I was married to. My father had passed away and I felt like a broken man for a short while, and friends of mine who cared for me said, why don't you take a sabbatical for 6 months, do some healing, do some reflecting, set your path for the next thing. I thought that was a great idea. So I sort of rearranged my life so I could do that. But then a series of sort of unforeseen events happened, and I decided to extend my 6 months to a year, and then I decided to extend it a bit longer and a bit longer. And I ended up living out of my backpack for 14 years, which was never, ever my real intention at the beginning. But what kept happening during that time was I'd meet travelers and meet people on the road, and they asked me how it started, and I'd tell them the story and how I was an award-winning CEO in a business in England and how I let go of that to go on this journey of reinvention, which was supposed to be 6 months. And I told them all the things that had happened subsequently. And they always used to say in those conversations, if you ever write a book about this, Ray, I'd love to read it. Are you going to write a book? And I just laughed and said, no, I'm not doing this to be a writer. But after about 5 years, I sort of thought, oh, my God, I've heard this so many times. The universe is calling on me to write a book. So I then started to write the story down.
Yeah, because you were sending a diary out, weren't you? I mean,
yeah, that's right.
At what stage did you start that? Because I used to read that avidly, seeing your adventures in Thailand and wherever you were.
Well, the concept for that came when I first left England. I was traveling with a woman called Annie, and the two of us together, we wanted to make a contribution to our folks back home and people we knew from our journey. So we created a blog called The Daily Lama, which was a bit of a tongue-in-cheek, irreverent view of our trip, written in the third person by a guy called Mozzie Bite.
Mozzie Bite, that's right.
And Mozzie Bite was the writer. And he would interview Ray and Annie as they traveled around and ask them questions about what they were learning, what they were doing. And it was fun. It gave me and Annie a sort of a really creative outlet, and we had a lot of fun together doing it. And then after about 18 months, Annie and I broke up. And as part of the breakup, we both agreed it was not fair for one of us to continue with the Daily Lama and not the other. So we killed it off. And I started a new blog called The Daily Explorer.
Mm.
And it was still written in the same way with a third person and still with Mozzie Bite, but it was sort of more geared to my own ongoing journey from that point. And funnily enough, Annie and I did actually get back together for a year, and she came back into the Daily Explorer story. But that's how I kept everyone up to date. That's how I kept everyone informed. And actually, when I was writing the book, it was so useful to be able to go back through those episodes to get data about times and places and stuff like that. I'm really glad that I did.
Yeah.
And I learned how to write doing that as well. So, because I did that for about 4 or 5 years before I started work on the book, and sort of honed my writing a bit better.
You've sort of talked about the universe. Tell me a little bit about synchronicity and your experience of synchronicity and what it means to you.
Gosh, I could talk on this forever. I've got so many examples of things that happened to me which just had a sort of universal perfection to them. It's really hard to describe. So let me see if I can give you some examples. So the first one was that when all of that collapse of the life that I knew happened, even though I'm a coach and I help others to work through those kinds of situations, I was just completely lost and stuck, and I couldn't see my way out of it. And I remembered a piece of advice that someone gave me, and they said, if you're ever really in a place of despair and you can't see a way out and it all looks bleak, just go into service 100% to someone else for a while, and something will come out of that. Something will emerge. And I remembered that. And so the first thing was, I remembered that at that moment. I mean, that's a piece of synchronicity in itself, just the fact that that was the thing that came to the surface in that moment of despair. Then I happened to find out that a really good friend of mine who'd emigrated to Australia, her name's Elizabeth Taylor, I found out she had breast cancer. So I got in touch with her and I said, what's happening? And she said, I'm going to have chemotherapy. And she had a very young son. And I said, can I come and look after you for a while? Can I come and stay with you and take care of you and help you around your life while that's going on? She said, yeah, that would be great. And so I flew to Australia to do that as an act of service, and then to take my mind off all of the stuff I couldn't really resolve at home. And as I left her place, I had a few spare days left. So I went to see another friend up in Cairns in Australia. And when I got to her place, Julia, her name is, she said, me and my mum are going to see this play at the theatre. Do you want to come? And I said, yeah, I'd love to come. And while we're in the interval of the play, I'm seeing there's an audition being announced for the next production of the play that they're going to do at this theatre called Out of Order. And it's about an English member of parliament. I'm from England, so I just said for a joke, I should be in that play. I got the perfect English accent. Of course, my two friends said, well, why don't you go to the audition? We know the director, And I'm going to cut a very long story short because all of this is in the book. I got miraculously, I couldn't believe it, I got offered the leading role in the play, which I've got no experience as an actor. I've never trained. I've never acted it before in my life. I had some business experience, but not acting. But my sister-in-law is an actress, and so I checked in with her and said, do you think I could carry this off? And she said, yeah, probably, with a bit of guidance. And after doing that play, because I did actually go through with it, and I missed a really important bit out, which is pertinent to your question, the universal guidance. One of my core values is integrity, and before I went to the audition for that play, I'd given my word to about 4 or 5 clients in England that I would work with them when I came back from Australia. And so that I was booked in and they were waiting for me to return, and they had things they wanted help with. And then I did this audition. I got miraculously offered a part in the play, and I felt like God wanted me to do it or something. I felt really pulled to do it. I knew it was important. Didn't know why, but I knew it was important. I thought, I'm in a real dilemma here. I've given my word to these 4 or 5 people, which means I can't do it because I'm committed. But I also know I have to do it because I just know. What do I do? I thought, you know what? I'm just going to go and speak to each one of those people and tell them the honest truth. I'm going to tell them exactly this story that I'm telling you. And I'm going to say, if you give me your blessing to go, I would really be happy to do it. But if you say, no, I want you to stay and do the work, I'm going to do that. And every single one of them gave me their blessing and said, if I was in your shoes, I would go. Definitely, you've got to do it. You've just got to do it. I encourage you to go. And so that was what I call in the book a confirmation signal. And I constantly look for confirmation signals when I'm facing a decision, because it's always good to know that you feel in the feeling of it that you're making the right decision. It's something that Sid Banks talks a lot about in the Three Principles work. Sid always used to say, you've got to find the truth in the feeling of it. It's not an intellect thing. And I believe that's when we connecting with a higher form of guidance, like a higher power that gives us clarity about those kinds of decisions. And so I've got lots and lots of examples where that happened to me in the journey. Yeah. And it sort of strengthened my antenna to tune into that guidance and to actually be able to select the right kind of confirmation signals, because sometimes you have to allow the universe to choose one for you. And sometimes you have to say, right, my confirmation signal, another one was when I decided to write the book. I thought, my God, I don't know anything about writing a book. I literally know nothing. I better go on a course. And then as I was having those thoughts, I noticed on Facebook, a woman from New York had announced she was going to do a 5-day writers retreat in Chiang Mai, which is where I was staying. And she was a really big, successful author and literary agent, and she had big credentials. And so this 5-day course was $1,200. I didn't have $1,200. I was on a budget travel and I wasn't earning any money. I was running a foundation and raising money, but I wasn't earning any money. And I wrote to her and I said, I'd love to do your course because I feel like I'm being called to write a book and I know nothing about to write it. So I'd like to do your course, but I've got 2 questions. One is, would you accept someone who is not a writer, because all the people that are coming seem to be published authors already and I'm a novice. So would I be the dunce of the class? Would I be holding everyone up? Would it be okay for me to be a student on the course? And the second question is, I can't pay $1,200, but I can pay $500. Would you accept $500? And I thought, if she says yes to these, that's my confirmation signal that that's the thing I'm meant to do. And she wrote back and said yes and yes. And I knew that was a confirmation signal, and that was absolutely the place I should be. Yeah, so I don't know if that answers the question. But.
Well, yes, and it's also it takes me into one of the key sort of aspects. I think I was with a colleague yesterday, and we were exploring my offering, as the CEO of Serenity and Leadership, and we were looking at all the subjects that I speak about, and at one level they look very disparate. Going from talking about the masculine and the feminine, and how the feminine is, in my view, very suppressed in both men and women, and how we need the feminine. We still need the masculine, but we need functional. Sort of grown-up versions, as opposed to what we have today in organizations, particularly. And I talk about bullying, and I talk about challenging what's normal, which I think is an important concept, because everybody who is marginalized we see as not normal. That's why they're marginalized.
Yes.
And yet it's the normal that sets the rules. And what right have we got to do that? Just because there's more of us. So anyway, so we were sort of grouping them all together and came up with this sort of title of conscious leadership. And for me, it's absolutely fundamental that leaders for the future are self-aware.
Definitely.
Self-awareness is the sort of the cornerstone of leadership, and it's not actually taught very much.
Yeah, I mean, we're all coming to that discovery, I think, slowly. You know, some of us maybe a bit sooner than others, but everything's pointing in that direction. I'm totally with you on that.
Yeah.
There's a brilliant book called The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leaders by Jim Dethmer, which I found really a goldmine. And there's one fantastic model in that book which I sometimes refer people I work with to, where he just draws a horizontal line across a blank sheet of paper and he says, Tom, do you spend more time above the line or below the line? And so naturally people say, what is the line? Not sure. Well, and he says, well, above the line, you are open, curious, and committed to learning. And below the line, you are closed, defensive, and committed to being right. And people go, oh, gosh, I spend about 80% of my time below the line. So it's a very good conversation starter, that model, for exploring that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So in the context of conscious leadership, at the back of your book,
yes,
you talk about some lessons that you've learned. I think I can call them lessons.
Yeah.
And I thought it might be interesting just to explore those just a little bit, to go through those.
Yeah, I want to set a context for that, because for me, the purpose in writing the book was to share a real story about someone working through challenges in their own life. And because I often feel like in the coaching world, we sometimes run the risk of sort of appearing to know everything, that we've got everything handled or something. And I didn't want to be one of those guys who wrote the kind of book that goes, you know, I went on this journey, I've sorted everything out now, I never have to feel anything again. I'm really, really worked out the secret to life. Because that's not true. I haven't. And I'm still, failing at certain things. I'm still struggling and being challenged by certain things myself. But I wanted to share a real practical story so that people can sort of, a bit like, one of these documentaries that takes you behind the scenes and gives you a fly on the wall view of what really happens. And so my editors, bless them, who were really supporting me to be coming up with the best story I could, they suggested to me that I wrote the last chapter of the book to reflect back on the journey and say what I'd learned. And I thought, yeah, I could do that. There are some things I've learned, and I thought I'll share them with my readers, not to say this is the rules you should follow, but these were the rules that gave me the best happiness in the journey. These were the rules I identified that worked for me. Maybe you could refer to these to come up with your own, or maybe some of them work for you, but not to be a doctrine or a sort of hard and fast about it. But so the ones that worked for me were, first of all, the first one I wrote was, it's really, happiness is coming from having relationships in your life that are supportive, sustainable, and powerful and empowering. And that's always worked for me. And it's, from even before this journey started. And so showing up in life in a way that you can create those kinds of relationships, I think, is one of the rules for happiness that I believe in. And that was validated, in fact, I ran my own company for several years. And in the last chapter of the book, I wrote about how I returned to Europe in the 13th year of 14 to start working again in Europe. And I reached out to one of my former employees of First Place, the company I had, who'd been a really loyal servant. And when I had to sell the company, I really wanted her to be safe and secure. So I went to a rival company with, very quietly and told them that she was going to be available. And they hired her, and she had a really successful ongoing journey in her career in that company. And I did that because I felt it was the right thing to do, because I really just, wanted to reflect the loyal service that had been given to me. So I felt really good about that. There was no money involved. It was just purely something I felt was the right thing to do. So 13 years later, when I reached out purely on a social basis and said, what are you up to? And she said, I'm launching this new business and we're going to be doing coaching for leaders, etc. I said, wow, that sounds brilliant. I said, would there be a place for me on the team? She said, absolutely. There's a place for you, ready. Mm. And so it's a great example of how these principles actually work in practice. So that's the first one, building powerful, sustainable, supportive relationships.
Yeah,
so
you call it a foundation, don't you?
Yeah, building a foundation, yeah.
Yeah. And then I love the second one, fully own everything that happens.
Yeah, I mean, that's tough to do sometimes. During my divorce, it was very tempting occasionally to make it all about Charlotte and her choice to leave and how poor me would be suffering because of that, etc. And there was a bit of that, I have to say. But I also knew at a much deeper level that I'd not shown up well in that relationship. And I knew that there were things that I could have done much, much better as a partner and as a husband. And I had to face the truth of that. I had to take ownership for the fact that what was happening was a consequence of a lot of small decisions I'd made over a long time that suddenly kind of burst out to the surface. So that's an example. And it's obviously one of the most important things as a leader, I think, because you don't have the luxury of blaming circumstances and others when you've got people to take care of. You just have to own whatever's happening and find out that resource state within you that is going to be the most useful in that moment. It's just a luxury you don't have. So I think fully taking ownership, and it's not something we're taught as kids, Tom. You know that. I mean, we're brought up as kids to, in the punishment reward psychology that Marshall Rosenberg talks about in nonviolent communication. If you tidy your room, mummy will be very pleased with you, and if you don't, you're going to get punished. And so we kind of create this dualistic thinking of right, wrong, good, bad, who's to blame, judging others. And so it takes a really conscious effort, I think, to know that your mind is operating in the way that it is, so that you can find new pathways through and around it. And it's a really it was a conscious effort for me, which was kick-started when in the first year I did a Vipassana retreat in a Buddhist monastery. I spent 10 days in silent meditation with Buddhist monks, and every day they gave us a Dharma talk, a teaching on the Buddhist principles. And that's where I started to see that victim kind of thinking mentality so clearly for myself, in myself. It started to emerge really clearly there.
Yeah. We live in a society where the victim is the star. You only need to listen to Donald Trump, and you have extraordinary examples of that, and how much that's sort of echoed.
Yeah.
But one of the challenges, I think, particularly around when people see bullying in organizations, is do you have the strength of will and integrity to call out bad behavior? Or are you going to be a bystander that does nothing because it's too dangerous?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, I've never encountered that myself directly, so I can't really say. But
I think it's a big conversation at the moment around bullying and the whole of actually the masculine in organizations. Are you part of the problem, or are you part of the solution? And I think the way forward for a lot of people has to sit on the fence. And I don't think there's any room to sit on a fence anymore. I think people have got to stand up and actually have the courage to like, for instance, as you described, as you closed down the first place, and somebody who'd been loyal, how did you treat them? How did you look after them?
I think I was lucky though that I'd had already started my journey of kind of awakening, let's say, and being more conscious about these things before the journey began. So I had already some insight and some understanding and awareness of my purpose in the world and who I wanted to be, even though it was quite rudimentary. But I think there's many people I meet who haven't opened the lid on that stuff yet, so it's going to be very challenging for some of those people to kind of know how to act courageously in some of these events. I think I think one of the things I've learned a lot about is compassion, because I used to be judging everybody, left, right, and center, based on my own standards and level of consciousness. But I realized that I've actually been extremely fortunate to have had the time and support and great teachers to expose me to a lot of thinking that I hadn't been exposed to. Now that I have a different level of awareness in myself, I feel much more qualified to be able to help others and help them start that journey, which is one of the reasons I really wanted to write the book, because I just genuinely want to encourage people to wake up. There's so much of our thinking is shaped for us in the modern world. The media shape our thinking. We don't realize sometimes just how kind of guide railed our thinking is, until it's made completely obvious.
Yeah, and there's no doubt that does take courage, is to ask yourself, what do I think, as opposed to what should I think?
Yeah.
In other words, who do I need to please? Whose expectations do I need to satisfy?
Yes.
Because all the time we're doing that, we're compromising ourselves.
Yeah.
But that means stepping out, in a sense, alone.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. It does. And that's quite scary, but it's also quite liberating. It's a mix of both. It's, like one of the things we talk about a lot in the world of coaching is, you don't learn anything without some discomfort. Not learning anything that's worth learning, that's significant, I mean.
Yeah.
It comes with discomfort. That's the nature of learning, because you're always stretching beyond what you already know. You're in the unknown. And for me, exploration is one of my core values. I don't feel happy in life if I'm not exploring or stretching on the edge of something most of the time. I have, at least in one area or one part of my life.
Yeah, and you say that in the book, and I think it's a lovely way to look at it. It's you come at things with curiosity.
Yeah, I've kind of changed. I've changed the way I see myself as someone who had to get it right in the beginning of part of my life, which was to be a success, to get some badges of success. Someone who had to get it right and get the approval of others. That was one version, which I lived in for 25, 30 years, and that was okay. And now I see myself as a bit like a scientist experimenting. So there's nothing to get right, because I'm just going to experiment and see what happens and take the learning from it and then decide on the next experiment. So I feel much freer, because as a scientist experimenting, there's no right way of it needing to turn out. And so it removes a lot of the stress and expectation of what should happen.
I can hear a lot of people saying, yeah, that's all very well, but I've got a mortgage and I've got kids and I've got all these things in my life that I've got to attend to.
Yeah, that's true. Those things have to be incorporated and taken into account. They do. And that's a creative challenge to how can you take care of the basics and whilst still moving in the direction of your best life.
I remember coaching someone some years ago, and he was being paid a very, very good salary, but he was committed to the hilt in the way that he spent that money. So he had a couple of kids, they were in private school, and he had a big mortgage. And, he once said to me, in a moment of sort of revelatory honesty, he said, actually, what I really want to do is I just want to go into the country somewhere and run a pub.
Yeah.
And just talk to people. That's what I want to do. And he said, I can't, because I'm stuck with all these commitments. And actually, all those commitments were making him very unhappy.
Yeah, I found that to be totally true. That was one of the things, when I was a CEO of First Place, I was on a 6-figure salary, lived in a 3-story house in Parsons Green, one of the best parts of West London. And the cost of that life every month is colossal. It was thousands of pounds, for the mortgage and the Mercedes and the motorbike and holidays and the restaurants. And so you're on these very high incomes with a very affluent lifestyle, but it's all leaking out the bottom, because in order to sort of, from an egoic perspective, in order to justify that kind of life, you have to have all the trimmings. Otherwise, what's the point in having it? And so it's kind of weird. It's like, it struck me after I did the play in Australia that I was actually playing a character of an affluent, wealthy businessman, but it wasn't really who I wanted to be. I was in the costume of that guy. I had the income of that guy. I had the expenditure of that guy. I had all the props of that life. And so when Charlotte and I divorced and it was all started crumbling apart, I was left with the stage of that life to finance. And it was just me on my own. And I knew I couldn't do it. I just didn't energetically want to do it, and I couldn't. And so I decided to re-engineer my life completely. And I wrote about this in the book. I read the Minimalists by Joshua Fields Millburn and Ryan Nicodemus, and I read into how they'd experimented with what they actually need against what they actually accumulated, and how minimalism took shape. And I also read an amazing book called Stuffocation by James Woolman, which I've referenced in my own book. And he was talking about the shift in thinking across younger generations, to me, away from values based on materialism to values based on what he called experientialism. People wanting more experiences in life rather than owning stuff. And so I thought, you know what, I just need to experiment. I don't know the truth of any of this. There's all these different points of view. What's the truth? I thought, you know what I'll do? I'll sell my house and I'll sell all the stuff and I'll go back to zero. I'll just leave myself with a bag of clothes, 20-kilo bag of clothes and a laptop. And I'll find out, once I've done that, when I've traveled a bit with nothing, I'll find out what the truth is. And so that's what I did. And my first year on the road, our first full year, I was in Asia. My total cost for the whole year, with all my food, accommodation, travel, flights, visas, the lot, was about £7,000 for the whole year. It was nearly that much a month in London, to have the life I had. So I was saving a colossal amount of money and not having to work as much, because I didn't need to spend anything like I was spending. And so for me, I'm just saying, for me, it worked really well for that period to realize my happiness wasn't coming from those things. And that was one of the delusional thoughts I was holding. And I realized that through the meditation, that I thought my happiness was attached to the things I had, but in fact it wasn't.
So this series is called Leading Responsibly with Integrity and Purpose, and you've talked about responsible leading, and you talked about integrity. Let's talk a bit about purpose.
Yeah.
In my experience, purpose changes. It's not a lifelong thing. You go through phases, and I think one's purpose alters. And for me, it's about being open to if you like, allowing the universe to direct you and to help bring out the best in you in a particular set of circumstances.
I agree.
You see it the same way?
Yeah, I can. If I think about my own journey, in my young life, my purpose was me focused. My purpose is to be the best at something, or the greatest at this or that, or most skillful, to be successful as an individual. And over the years, the way I feel and how things look to me has shifted more into a role of service. You know, I sort of, most of my purpose I would express in terms of where and how can I serve best. And that's based on my change in vision for the world, because I never used to think about how the world could be looking when at its finest and how things would work when I was younger. But I spend a lot more time thinking about that these days. And so one of the things I see that we really need in the world right now is much better leaders. You know, we're in a leadership crisis, basically. Yeah. And it's because of the generations of like unconscious thinking that's led to the ways of leadership we have. I mean, it is changing, thank God. It's, you know, it is shifting, but we definitely need better leaders. And better, I mean, people that lead from their own sense of values and purpose and beliefs about what's right and what's good for everybody.
And they actually know what those are.
And they know what those are, and they're in service to the whole. And it's not, you know, like a lot of virtually all of our political leaders, certainly, and most of the current leadership in the corporatocracy, I would say, probably fall into this, are very self-oriented and obviously taking decisions and acting out those decisions where it's obvious that they don't benefit everybody. It can be more obvious because the wealth divide has just got huge, and it's like a big, it's like a heist. It's like a money grab, and it's all falling apart, and we can all see it, and everyone knows it. So I thought, well, what can I do? Just little me, you know, what can I do? Well, I can serve people who are on the path to becoming great leaders. I can help them develop, help them grow. I can support that journey because I've been through that myself. I've got some appreciation of the challenges of that journey, having been a CEO of a business already, plus having taken the journey I've taken, which is expanded and broadened how I'm understanding this journey. I can be of service to people. I can support them, and that's why I've chosen to work in that field, is so I can be of service to the bigger picture. You know, maybe we'll have much better leaders, you know, 5-10 years from now. Anyway, it's the best thing I can do with my energy, I think, at the moment. But it's very different to when I was younger and my purpose was something else.
Yeah, exactly. So it does evolve, and I think that can be quite releasing for people to realize that, also perhaps a bit scary, but if you identify, you know, when you have children, you know, yes, I'm going to be a great dad, or, you know, whatever, or I'm going to be the breadwinner for the family. And then later on things change.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of us, purpose finds us. It's that way round. You can't. It's not something you can intellectualize.
No,
because it's an energetic experience.
Yes,
like I've got. Yeah.
Sorry, it's. But I did a talk on this, and I call it surrendering to your purpose.
Yeah, lovely. Yeah, I had a great story the other day from a guy I worked with a while back, who he has 2 autistic sons, and so he wanted to find a swimming pool which could cater to their needs with some special classes, etc. And he looked around and eventually found a pool sort of near to his home and went and put his kids in that class. And after a couple of weeks of going along, he had a chance to speak to the swim instructor who ran that class. And he wanted to know how he became an instructor that did this special class for autistic children. And he thought the guy would say something like, well, I was an Olympic swimmer and I got an injury and I couldn't compete, but now I do this, etc. And it turned out something completely different. He said the guy was a kind of logistics manager for DHL or something like this. He had a really dull administrative job. And he said he just never really enjoyed it. It was okay, but it just never set him on fire. And he liked to swim. You know, that's what we realized, he liked to swim. And he had also had an autistic son, and he went looking for a place where he could take his son, but there was nothing. He couldn't find anything. So he decided on the side to become a fully qualified swim instructor whilst he held down his regular job. And then once he got the certifications. He went to the council and said, I want to start a class so I can put my son in it, and I want to offer it to the rest of the community. And they gave him the support to do that. And loads of people from the community stepped in and said, we really want this. We really want this. And it's become really successful, successful in terms of it meets a demand that was pent up. And the guy loves doing it, and he's really good at it. And it's because his passion. And he now earns a living from running these swim classes and workshops. And he lives in like dreamland. He's loves his life compared to the life he had before. That purpose sort of found him.
Yeah. But yes, as you say, it finds us, so we've got to be open to it, and that comes back to this whole piece about our self-awareness, because it I often say to people, it's that soft voice that speaks to you, and not everybody's done the Vipassana, where you have that silence. You challenge people in the book. How much time have you spent in silence? Yeah. As opposed to, eating a meal and actually just experiencing eating the flavors and the textures, and not just filling up the fork whilst you're finishing your mouthful, but actually allowing yourself to fully experience that mouthful, and then putting something else on your fork. It's like the meal takes longer, but it becomes a kind of meditation. But also, I think one can argue that it's actually much healthier, and we digest things so much better. So I mean, there's all sorts of things there, and it all comes out of a willingness to be in silence. I often challenge people when I say, when you come home, what's the first thing that you do? And either the TV's on already, or they switch it on. Or they switch the radio on. And, some people love having music around them and fine, which is great. But we have our own internal music. We have our own internal voice. And you've really got to give the space to hear it.
Yeah, it's the opposite of the thinking mind, isn't it? And one of the things I learned from the journey described in the book was the value and the power of being fully present in the moment, which I never had any experience of before I left, really. And why is that important? Because we spend most of our lives living in our thinking mind. And the issue I have with that is that when you're in your thinking mind, you're either dwelling in thoughts about the past and regurgitating and recycling things that have happened and replaying those events over and over. So you're living in an abstract concept of life because you can't be in the past anymore, but your thinking is. Or, and equally, we're living in the future and all the anxieties and possible scary outcomes that future might yield, and recycling our thinking over and over and over again about those scary or potentially sad outcomes that might happen, which haven't happened yet. So we're not actually right here in life, which is happening right in front of us right now. We're there for about 2 seconds a day in our actual life. 98% of it we're off in the future or the past. And that's and real, that inner voice can only speak to us when we're in the present moment. We can't hear it at any time other than that. And so the practice of becoming more present is giving you access to that voice. You literally don't have access to it when you're not present. And that's why it's valuable. That's the benefit of being present, is to get access to that voice more.
Well, yes. I mean, there's a huge payoff personally, but also I think that other people experience you so differently when you're with them and you're present. And it's not just when I'm in the same room as you, but actually you can tell when you're on the phone and someone's tapping at the keyboard, or they're checking an email whilst they're talking to you. You can tell.
You can.
And actually, I remember actually you met us, Sabrina, my daughter. I remember her saying to me once, "What are you doing?" Because she knew that I wasn't present with her.
Yeah.
I was doing something else and sort of talking to her on the phone. And it was a real sort of wake-up call. Say, this is not good. I'm not being fair.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we can tell, can't we? We know. Thich Nhat Hanh was one of the most amazing men I've ever met, and I met him twice. And I was very fortunate because he died a year ago to spend time with him. But he was the person that taught me the greatest gift you can give another human being is your full undivided attention. There's nothing greater than that. And I know that to be true.
Isn't that interesting? Because, there's all sorts of studies now showing that AI, artificial intelligence, is getting better responses from people, like customer service and stuff like that. And there's various AI therapy things online. And actually people are responding better to them because the response is coming as if that the AI, that person, the artificial
the personification,
person, the responses it's generating are giving the person the feeling that robot, whatever, is present with them. Isn't that super scary?
Yeah.
But there's a lot of studies now coming out about it. I mean, that's why, who is it? Octopus or BT? They're saying they're laying off tens of thousands of people because they're going to replace them with AI. And, the studies have shown them that customer responses are more positive. We have things to learn from that.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, that's a huge debate, isn't it? Whether AI is ultimately beneficial or not. Yeah, I'm sure that debate's going to rage on for months and years.
Well, like all these things, it's not black and white, and people try and put it into a box so they can try and understand it, but it's not that simple. Yes, there's some amazing things that can come out of AI, and there's some super scary things. I wrote an article about that. It's just been published. One of the things I say is, don't be fooled when the AI apologizes profusely because you say, actually, that answer you gave me is wrong.
Yeah.
They don't have feelings, but they're emulating feelings. But they do that very well.
Yeah, right. Yes. Yeah. Wow.
Food for thought. Ray, it's been amazing exploring with you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I really commend your book to everybody. Life Without a Tie. What's the subtitle? Finding Your Path Amidst the Noise, Chaos, and Pressure to Conform. There you go. That's what we've been talking about.
Thank you. For anyone who's listening who wants it, I did an audio of the introduction to the book. It's about a 20-minute audio, and that's available on the website, the book's website. It's a free download. So if you want to, anyone who's listening wants to listen to the book's introduction and get a sense of what the book's about, you can go to lifewithoutatie.com and get a free audio download. And I'll be delighted to have a virtual coffee with any of your listeners that reads the book. I'll be thrilled to do that. So,
yeah. There's lots to learn, I think, Ray, from your experiences. And I think that the world that we're in and where we're going, we need a lot more people who are in that sense of serenity. That's my company, Serenity in Leadership. And I think that it is that sense of serenity that you exude that we need so much more of. So thank you.
Welcome. Good to see you, Thom.